Today I'm going to show you the highly sought after Roland Juno 60 from 1982. These were released shortly after the Juno 6, and much like the 6, it's a 5-octave, 61-key, 6-voice polyphonic synth. And it's probably safe to say they sound identical to each other, but what the 60 has over the Juno 6 in terms of features was the ability to save and back up your sounds via this patch memory feature here, which allows you to save up to 56 patches, aka sounds, and this tape interface system here that gives you the ability to save and load your patches to a tape recorder. But times have changed since 1982, so you're no longer limited to tape recorders to back up your sounds. We could in fact use a D.A.W or possibly even a smartphone if you have the appropriate cables and connectors. I'll demonstrate how to save and load your sounds towards the end of this video. Further to that, I'll leave you with the batch of sounds that are currently in this Juno 60 for you to download into yours. So stay tuned for that. Moving on to something else you won't find on a Juno 6 is this DCB port here, which is the digital control bus and was more or less Roland's polyphonic version of control voltage and gate, which predated MIDI of course, but these days you can have your Juno retrofitted with MIDI or simply purchase a MIDI to DCB converter like this one here from Kenton in the UK. I'll put the link in the description area below so you can look them up, but they're very good as they can provide sync to your arpeggiator via MIDI and also give you additional modulation sources for your Juno's filter. If you're finding this clip useful, give it the big thumbs up and hit the subscribe to see more videos on other classic keyboards soon. So diving right in, starting from the far left, we've got the power switch, and then we've got the hold and the transpose buttons here. So if I was to hold down a chord, I could hit the hold button, and then I could let go of my notes or my chord, and the hold feature will keep them held down for as long as it's on. So if I was to let go of that, then they're up again. There's also a hold connector on the back, so you could plug in a Roland DP2 sustain pedal, and then you could operate that with a foot pedal. So again, if I was to hold that, it'll just sit there waiting to hold any particular note that comes along. And in conjunction with the hold, I can use the key transpose. So if I was to hold this down and now select any particular note off middle C up to a range of 1 octave, and you'll see the light go out when I'm back on middle C. So that's a useful little section there. Over to the right of that, we have the Arpeggio section, which is the Juno's arpeggiator. And if I was to hold down that chord that I was hanging onto before and enable the arpeggio, it'll cycle between the notes of my chord. If I let go, it'll just stop. So what I would do is hold down the arpeggiator with my chord and then use the hold feature in conjunction with my arpeggiator. Then I can let go of the notes, and the Juno will just constantly cycle between those notes in that chord. I could also use the direction as well, because at the moment it's cycling upwards of those notes and then looping around. So it's cycling each note in a sequential fashion and then cycling to the other side, but I can also choose downwards. So now it's using the top and all the other notes in a downward sequential fashion. And the middle option I have is up and down, which will use both. It'll cycle upwards and then hit the end and then cycle downwards and then keep repeating. And then I've got the rate, which is the arpeggiator speed. And then a higher amount will be a lot faster. There's also an arpeggiator input switch on the back, a clock input for your arpeggiator. So if you have something like a Roland TR-808 or a TR-909, possibly a 606 or some other Roland drum machine from the similar period, generally they have a clock output that you can connect to this, and that means this will be arpeggiating in time with one of your other drum machines. So it's a very handy feature, and you can get some really good effects out of it too. So before we move off this, I'll just cover this little range that we have here. This range option allows us to enable the arpeggiator, and if I put the hold on, I can select a group of keys or notes and have it cycle up to a second octave, which is the equivalent of holding these 2 octaves down while the arpeggiator's on. Or I can go up to a third octave, and it's all those same notes from these 3 octaves here virtually. And again, I could use only upwards as a direction to cycle them, and then I could also choose downwards, but I could speed it right up and get some interesting effects, almost like an old key gen, or an old like Galaga or some sort of old Space Invaders machine sort of sound effect. So that's the arpeggiator section there for the Juno 60. To the right of our arpeggiator we have the LFO section, which is our low frequency oscillator, and if I was to hold down an interval, the 5th, and use our hold feature, I could dial in about 50 or 60% LFO rate, which is the speed of the LFO, and then I could choose whether I want to influence the filter or the pitch in our DCO section, the digital controlled oscillator. So if I was to dial in a little bit of LFO here, you can hear the speed of the LFO influencing our pitch. And so if I left it up at around 60%, I could flick the trigger mode to manual, which means now we don't have any LFO influencing our pitch unless this button here, the LFO trigger, is pressed. Which is good if you need to kind of solo and apply just a little bit of vibrato while you're soloing or whatever. So that's a handy feature there. But I could also pull out the LFO from the pitch area, or the DCO, and dial it in to our VCF, which is our filter. And if I pull down the speed of the LFO and now hit the button, you can hear the filter now being influenced by the LFO. So that's a handy little feature there. Another thing that's good about the LFO is that it also has a delay. So if I didn't want it to come in immediately, I could switch this back to automatic, and then once the time is reached on the delay section, then the LFO slowly fades in. Same with the pitch on the DCO. So you can have quite a little bit of time there to organise those kind of vibrato effects to seep into your filter or your pitch. Moving across, we have the DCO section here, which is the Juno 60's digitally controlled oscillator. And if I was to hold down a chord, use our hold feature, the DCO is considered our tone generator. So if I was to disable our square wave that we're currently using, we wouldn't hear anything. But I could also select our sawtooth or our sub-oscillator. And the sub-oscillator is basically a square wave, but 1 octave lower. So if I was to hit the square wave, but then choose the sub-oscillator, we're basically hearing the same thing, but at different intervals. And we also have a little bit of flexibility over our square wave that we can turn into a pulse by using the PWM, which is our pulse width modulator. So if I was to hold a chord, you can hear the influence of the pulse width that I'm adjusting here. So I'll use the hold. If I go right to the top, apparently it becomes another square wave at the other end of the spectrum, but all through here, at the very bottom, it's a square. So in the middle, it's a pulse, and then I can use the LFO to influence that as well. And again, with the speed or the rate of the LFO, you can hear the pulse is being adjusted or influenced by the speed in the LFO. And we also have another option. We can use the envelope to influence the width of those pulses. So if I was to have some sort of contoured shape with my envelope using the attack, decay, sustain and release, the contour of this particular envelope will be played out by the pulse width. So it's a little difficult to hear, but you can hear that because I've got lots of attack, the pulse width is opening up, and then with the decay and the sustain, it's then closing, and then it settles on the value of the sustain. And then depending if I've got release or not, then you can slowly hear the pulse width being adjusted as the note's being released. So you can get some interesting effects out of your PWM. Moving over to the sawtooth, this is a static tone, so you can use all three of them together too if you like. And the sub-oscillator has a volume level, so you can have just a little bit with the sawtooth, or just a little bit or a lot with pulse or square. And then last of all, on your DCO, you have the noise generator, which if you organize your envelope in such a way, you can create all sorts of science fiction sounds, snares, and all sorts of other little things. Laser beam sounds, all sorts of sound design goodies in there. So I'll just leave it on sawtooth for the moment. So that's our DCO section. Moving across to our high-pass filter, here we can hold down any particular note or chord. And if we adjust this, you can hear that the high-pass starts to block out the low-end information. And it's only letting the high-frequency information through. Next we have the lovely sounding voltage control filter of the Juno 60, the VCF section here. So if I hold down a chord and adjust the freak amount, which is the frequency, you can hear the frequency blocking out the high-end information, or filtering out the high information, which is what the job of the filter is. So that's the resonance there. can hear those screeching harmonics in the back there. If I adjust the KYBD, this is the tracking of the harmonics. So if I was to put in a little bit of influence of the LFO, you kind of get a spectrum of what the harmonics can do. And if I adjust the KYBD some more, you can expose a little more harmonics as well. So you can really get this thing screeching, it's quite good. But I'll put the resonance down to 0, open up the filter, and now we'll get the envelope to influence the filter. We've got the chord that I'm playing on hold, so now the amount of filter is being influenced by the sustain amount on our envelope. So if I pull that down to 0, remove the hold, now restrike the chord, we'll just get the attack and the decay bleeding in on our filter. And so if I use 50% envelope, we're now just getting a little bit of amount, so a tiny 25% amount of decay. It's almost nothing. So if I put up 100% attack, and then it shuts down by the time it hits decay. So I can have 50% decay and then 50% sustain, and now the attack will rise, or it'll make the filter rise, and then drop and sustain at 50% level. And if I was to put 100% envelope, but then if I pull the sustain down to 0 and retry that, and now if I pull the attack down, and if I pull the release down, we'll put the release all the way up. And so I can pull back the envelope on the filter, and now you're only getting a little bit of those. You're getting 50% of the contour from the envelope influence the filter. So if I pull the frequency all the way down, probably won't hear anything. But then if I crank the envelope influence up, so you can sort of see the relationship between the envelope and the frequency, where the frequency's blocking out the high end, but then the envelope can also punch through that ceiling of where the frequency is. And then we have the polarity of the envelope here, which is generally used for special effects and things. So if I reverse the polarity, put the frequency up, it's almost now in reverse. So there are some good effects that you can do with your filter and the in conjunction with the envelope. So then if I was to bleed in some LFO, so you can sort of hear how all three of these little sections are now sort of cooperating with each other. So if I was to add a little bit of this chorus, and you can sort of hear how the chorus has now added this stereo dimension to the sound of the Juno 60. And that's partly because the chorus effect is actually a true stereo effect signal. So you'd want to actually have two left and right outputs out of your Juno if you're going to use your chorus, because you get that real stereo dimension properly with the stereo signal coming out of your Juno. If you're not using the chorus, the Juno is basically a mono signal. Despite the fact you could have a stereo signal coming out of your Juno 60, you're only really going to utilize the left and right in a different way with the chorus enabled. So if I try chorus 2, this will be a little thicker again. And there's a little bit of an Easter egg where you can get both of them together if you connect them both at the same time. So the next section we have is the VCA, which is our voltage controlled amplifier. So this is basically the level of the sound that we're generating at the moment. I like to usually have this at about 50%, well, at 0. 50% if you're talking 0% at the bottom, 100% at the top. But the level can sometimes distort. If you've got all three of these oscillators pumping and your level is at 100% and you've got your chorus on, I don't think that's wise, because I'm not too sure if the chorus can handle that. But I know it's sometimes going to overload the output. So you could damage your speakers, or you might even burn out your chorus chips sooner than later, which might be a wives' tale, but I kind of think it might be the reason why these chorus chips always seem to be dying on Junos these days. Regardless of that, that's just a theory of mine. But I sort of tend to prefer to have just about 50% on the VCA, unless you're using really quiet sounds, just like a noise generator on its own with no tone generators being utilized. So for that reason, I sort of tend to keep it about 50%. And what we have next to the VCA is this switch here, which can be set to envelope, which is what I've got it set to now, or we can have it set to gate. And that means the voltage-controlled amplifier, or the level, is just going to be on and off, depending on whether or not my hands are down. Or compared to the envelope. But that means the filter's using the envelope, but then my amplifier isn't. My amplifier is just using on and off, which is why it says gate. If you can see the gate there, the gate's representing when my hands are down and when my hands are off. So the envelope is disregarding the gate or my hands, so what'll happen is the envelope is now being influenced by my note on and note off information. So the release on the envelope will only kick in once my note off occurs. If I have sustain all the way up, it'll sound out for as long as I keep my fingers down, but then as I let go, then release will kick in and give me this amount of duration for the end of it. So 25% release will be quite quick, or 100% release will be almost hanging on forever, or as long as it can. Same goes for the hold feature here. If I hold down a chord and then let go a hold, that's when the release will kick in. And if I put 100% attack, 25% release. And so now if I was to hold down a note, you can hear the attack come in. Then it's over to the decay amount. Then after decay is exhausted, then it goes up to sustain or down to sustain, whichever way. And then as soon as I take my hand off, it's over to the release amount. So that's how the envelope section works in conjunction with the filter or your voltage controlled amplifier, depending if you've got it set to gate or envelope. So if it's set to gate only, then the filter is only taking use of my envelope. So that's basically the sound manipulating components we have of the Juno 60. If I wanted to save this particular sound, I could actually just go to my patch memory area and hold down right, and then select a bank. We'll say bank 5, and I'll save this at patch 4. So patch 54 is now this particular sound. And if I wanted to choose another sound, I could just dial 58 or 57, 51 or 41. And I can edit all the other sounds as well. So it's very useful having this patch memory area. Being a Juno 6 owner myself, I love both of them, but it's very handy having the ability to save your sounds. Now if I wanted to save this to bank 71, I could just hold down right, hold down 5 and 2, because 5 and 2 together are 7, and then hit 1. And now that sound, or the re-edited version of sound 41, is now sitting at 71, but then I also have that untouched version sitting at 41. If I wanted bank 61, again it's 5, 1 and 2, or any of those particular numbers, and that's how you can access the extra 2 banks up there, whether they're 6 or 7. So I'll save that to bank 73. It should be said that the frequency amount here of the filter can be manipulated by a foot controller as well, like a foot pedal that you can sweep. So it's the equivalent of having your foot being able to control in real time just by connecting a foot controller to the back. And I know Moog sell those foot controllers. There's various other ones around, but I know Moog still make theirs readily available if you can't find one anywhere else, secondhand or otherwise. Next we have this little section down here. So if I was to hold a chord and use the bender, and this little bender is being set by this amount of DCO here. And if I take the DCO out, put the VCF in, that's the equivalent of this filter doing that. And then this LFO trigger, as we explained earlier, which is used in conjunction with these two settings here. And so then we've got this little octave transpose area here, and that'll shift the keyboard up an octave further or an octave lower. So that covers most of the sound editing features that we have on the Juno 60, but before I forget, the manual button that we have here is to revert all these faders and switches into their current positions across the front panel, which is handy if you want to create a new patch from a clean slate. Next, we'll take a look at how to back up our sounds using the tape interface, and if you're feeling adventurous, you can try loading these sounds I have on this Juno here, but before you do that, I recommend you back up your own, because the last thing you want to do is be stuck with 56 sounds of mine if you think they suck. For best results, you should use regular style guitar jacks, like these here, also known as 1/4 inch TS or tip and sleeve jacks, just not TRS jacks. Ultimately, the Juno generates an audible signal from the tape interface, similar to a fax machine. And that's basically all it is. But it's very quiet, so you need a lot of gain on the input going into your audio interface / D.A.W, and then you want to capture it at around -3 dB to -1 dB. And on playback, it also needs quite a bit of level on it going back into the load jack on the rear of the Juno. If you overload the volume, you'll see a message say ER, which means error in this LCD window here. And on playback, if it's too quiet, you'll also see ER in here as well. So you want to capture the tape interface's pilot tone in your D.A.W, which starts immediately when you hit save. Then roughly 4 or 5 seconds after, you'll hear the modulated tone, which is the patch data. If you mess it up, or if you need to cancel the operation for whatever reason, just hit the manual button and then you can start again. In summary, the tape interface is quite simple. You just need to have your levels right. But the rule of thumb is that if you want to save something, you need to have a jack out of the save port on the rear of the Juno going into the audio interface, record it with lots of level up to -1 dB. If you want to verify what you've recorded, you've got to have a jack coming out of your audio interface into the load jack on the rear of the Juno. Then it's the opposite for verify and load. You need to be coming out of your audio interface into the load jack, plenty of level on it, and then play on your D.A.W so you've got your test tone playing at the time you either hit verify or load. And that should allow you to save your banks successfully and load them successfully. If you overload the volume, you'll see a message say ER, which means error in this LCD window here. And on playback, if it's too quiet, you'll also see ER here as well. And then it takes nearly a minute to complete. If it's successful, you'll see 2 dashes in the LCD window just like this. And that's just about everything we could possibly cover on a Juno 60. So I hope that's been helpful. If it has, give the clip a big thumbs up and subscribe to see more classic keyboards coming soon. Also check out the Tone Lab Instagram and Facebook page. Links in the description below. Thanks for watching and bye for now.